Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to episode 25 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about the multiverse. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today, of course, is Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Before we get started, folks, I want to let you know about something new we have on our website at sqpn.com/mysterious. We have the new Mysterious World bookstore. So Jimmy mentions a lot of resources in this show, lots of links to books and other stuff. And so anything that is available for purchase, so we'll put links to stuff in the show notes as usual, but anything that's available for purchase, you can just go to the bookstore at that link, sqpn.com/mysterious. You can go to that and click on the link for the bookstore, and all of it will be listed there by episode. Now, you'll notice some episodes are missing just because they didn't have books recommended for that episode. But it's all there in one place. So if you're looking for something, you're not sure what episode it was, you can find it all there in one listing.
Yeah, it'll have books, it'll have DVDs or online documentaries that you can pay to watch and things like that. Anything for purchase will be there.
Yes, exactly. And just as a disclaimer, a lot of those links go to Amazon, and if you buy something on Amazon, it helps SQPN. There's an affiliation, a little bit of money that comes back to support the show and help us continue to do what we do. So we do appreciate if you go through those links when you want to purchase.
Yeah.
So let's get right to today's topic, which is, as I mentioned, the multiverse. So, folks, you've probably heard of the multiverse or parallel worlds in a lot of science fiction TV shows and movies and books, and it's this idea that there are parallel worlds and parallel timelines, and in some of these stories, there's an infinite number of slightly different versions of us that exist, where every decision that we make is a branching universe, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, maybe Spock has a beard or something.
Right. He's a beard, therefore is evil. Of course, skeptics, kind of poo-poo this idea, but many scientists today are actually taking it seriously. So today on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, we're going to take on this topic and discuss whether parallel worlds might exist, including parallel copies of us. So Jimmy, what's going on here? Let's start at the basics. What is the multiverse?
Okay, so the term multiverse is a fairly recent coinage. It's obviously a play on universe, and it's kind of ironic because the term universe, una means one. And so the idea of the universe originally was it's everything, all of reality summed up into one. And so that was the idea for the universe. But then people said, well, maybe there are different pockets in all of reality that are very similar to each other and that are kind of like parallel universes. And if there was a time where you could have been a pedant and say, well, these are just other parts of the universe, because by definition, the universe is all of reality summed up into one. But language has its own life, and eventually the term multiverse, multi meaning many, came to be the established term for the whole collection of different pockets, and each pocket is then known as a universe. There are different types of multiverses, according to the speculation that's out there. Max Tegmark, who's a physicist, has a famous fourfold way of classifying different types of multiverses. You mentioned parallel timelines, for example. Mm-hmm. That's one example of how you could have a multiverse, but there are others. And Tegmark has identified 4. Some people would classify them other ways. There are other ways of classifying them and finer grained distinctions, but Tegmark's basic 4 are kind of a standard starting point. So his type 1 multiverse is basically just a physical extension of our own universe out beyond the beyond what's called the Hubble volume, which is the area of the visible universe that's accessible to us, that we can observe, because we can't see an edge to the universe, and our minds have trouble imagining edges anyway. And so for a lot of history, people assumed that space is infinite. And this was a common assumption among astronomers for a long period of time, even into the early 20th century. The idea, before we knew about other galaxies, was that basically space was infinite and it just had the Milky Way sitting in it, and that was all. And then we realized that these nebulas we saw in the sky, some of them are actually galaxies very far away. And that, was a major kind of world-shaking discovery in astronomy, to realize that the Milky Way isn't all of everything in the universe. But the idea of our universe, just physical space extending on infinitely, is something that is still around. And so since we can't see an edge, and since we have trouble imagining edges, a lot of astronomers would say, okay, we can see part of the universe, the part that light has had time to reach us, but there are other parts of the universe beyond that obey the same physical laws that we have here. We just can't see them because they're too far away for the light to reach us, to ever reach us, since the universe is expanding. And so they're causally isolated from us, and therefore they're classified, according to this theory, as other universes. The idea is then that if you have the laws of our universe operating on matter in all these different regions, sooner or later, every combination of matter that can happen under the laws of physics is going to happen somewhere out there. Whatever freaky, weird, rare chance it involves, a particular circumstance will happen. So, for example, since unicorns are physically possible, there would be unicorns out there somewhere. Since aliens are physically possible, aliens are out there somewhere, whether it's in our universe or a place we can't see. And since slightly different versions of us are possible, slightly different versions of us are out there in the same physical space we occupy. They're just too far away for us to ever see. And Tegmark has even calculated how close our nearest clones ought to be. And he's calculated that it's 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 115 meters away. And that's kind of hard for me to imagine in meters, a number like that. So I converted it to light years, which is for some reason slightly easier for me to imagine. And they would be 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 100 light years away, or 10 to the power of Google light years away. I may be off by an order of magnitude there, but I think that's the approximate number. So that's his type 1. Yeah.
Could I make it so, like, maybe by analogy, because I have a hard time imagining this at all. So maybe if our universe is the size of a marble, we're talking like to the distance of the moon from that marble?
Something like that.
Like a massive number.
Yeah, it's a really massive number, 10 to the power of Google being 10 to the power of 100.
Yeah.
That many light years away. So I'd have to do some further calculation to convert it to the marble thing. But as a physical picture, if you want to think of if you think of a gumball machine and you think of our universe as one of the gumballs, it's surrounded by all these other gumballs. Right. And an even better analogy would be if you think of like if someone has baked a gumball into Jell-O. Yep. All of that other Jell-O is out there. but we can only see what's in our little gumball area.
Okay. It's hard to imagine when you get to big, as we have said before, big numbers are big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's type 1.
Right. Type 1 is just physical space extends infinitely, and sooner or later you get repetitions of events.
Okay.
Type 2 is different. Type 2 says, okay, the laws of physics don't have to be constant. Maybe there are universes where the laws of physics are different. So instead of having, say, the expansion rate that our universe does, which is driven by dark energy, maybe there's a different amount of dark energy out there. Or maybe the gravitational constant is different, or maybe the charge of an electron is different. And so the idea for the type 2 multiverse is it would be every universe with every different combination of physical constants that are possible. It's often pointed out that our universe seems uniquely suited to having life in it. The gravitational constant has to be just the right number, or if it's even slightly off, stars won't produce the atoms you need for life. Protons have to have a certain charge and mass. Electrons have to have a certain charge and mass, or the right elements don't come around for life. And so astronomers have noted that and physicists have noted there are quite a number of constants, like a couple of dozen, that have to be precisely set in order for life to exist. And so some people have said, okay, that's a good design argument. It looks like our universe is designed by a designer. The alternative to that that's proposed is, well, maybe universes are kind of like a slot machine, and the laws of physics come up randomly with different constants in different universes. So if there are a bunch of universes which each have slightly different physical constants, some of them will have the right constants for life, and we just happen to live in one of those. It's kind of like if you're a fish, you may notice that the pond that you live in is suitable for you to be there. But that doesn't mean there aren't areas outside of the pond that are not suitable for you to live and that are not inhabited by fish. So if you're in a pond in a forest, well, there's all that other forest out there where there are no fish because it's not suitable for them. Fish only exists where it is suitable. And so people like us, humans, anthropoi, only exist where the conditions are right for us. And so this is what's known as the anthropic principle. And there are different versions of the anthropic principle, but the basic idea is we observe the kind of universe we do because it's the only kind of place we could exist. And presumably, according to the type 2 multiverse theory, there are loads of other universes out there, presumably with no life in them. Because their physical constants are different and they are not suitable for life, just like the forest is not a suitable place for a fish.
Okay.
So that's the type 2 multiverse theory. Type 3 is based on what you mentioned, alternate timelines. And this gets into quantum mechanics, which is a theory having to do with the very small aspects of reality, like individual particles within atoms and so forth. That's what quantum theory deals with. And the idea is that every time a particle decides to be in one place rather than another place, you have a split in the timeline. And so according to type 3 multiverse theory, every possible timeline based on quantum events happens. We don't see them because those other timelines have decohered from ours. That's the term that gets used. But they're all out there. It's kind of like if and you get a version of this in science fiction where instead of just particles deciding to be one place or another, people make choices. Mm-hmm. And so like there's a timeline where you decided to get married to your wife. And you, Dom Bettinelli, are living in that timeline.
Yep.
But you could have decided not to marry your wife. You could have decided to marry someone else or not to marry at all. And so those choices also, according to Type 3 multiverse theory, also got made. You're just not living in those timelines. They branched off from this one when you made the choice to marry your wife.
So, Jimmy, just because I know my wife is listening right now to this podcast, I just want to let her know that I would marry you in every timeline.
Well, that's reassuring to hear. Not sure all Type multiverse theorists are going to agree with that.
That's okay. I had to do that just because, domestic tranquility.
Oh, sure. That's an appropriate thing to say in this timeline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. So that's Type 3 multiverse theory. And then Type 4 is basically the proposal that every possible mathematically describable universe exists. And this is basically equivalent, as I understand it, to saying every logically possible state of affairs exists somewhere out there. And so for example, I mean, we mentioned unicorns and aliens. Any bizarre thing you can imagine happening, as long as it doesn't involve a logical contradiction, it's out there. Things like square circles and four-sided triangles are not out there because they involve logical contradictions.
Right.
So would Dom Bettinelli as a married bachelor, that's a logical contradiction. You can't be both married and a bachelor. So there's no timeline where Dom Bettinelli is a married bachelor. But every other possibility, as long as there's not a logical contradiction, is real.
Okay.
So that's Type 4. So just quick review. Type 1, our universe extends infinitely and you under the same laws and you get repetitions eventually. Type 2, every possible combination of laws applies to some universe. Type 3, every possible timeline happens. And Type 4, every mathematically or logically possible state of affairs happens.
Okay.
Now, within some of these, you get different proposals for how universes branch off from each other. In the timeline theory, it's kind of obvious. A choice gets made, and that's what causes the branch. With some of these others, like with Type 2, the question would be, how do these other universes get there? And there are proposals like maybe our universe buds off, or some primordial universe buds off new universes. And and when that happens, it's like a slot machine lever gets pulled and a new random combination of physical constants comes up. Or maybe you have even collisions between different universes, like two planets can smack into each other. Like apparently the Earth-Moon system, which is really two planets, no matter what they say, it is. I mean, the moon is a planet. I'm just sorry, but it is. We are living on Terra Major, and the moon is Terra Minor. But apparently, the early Earth was struck by an object. It's called Theia. That's the name for this hypothetical object. It was about the size of Mars, and it smashed into Earth, and that created a huge cloud of debris, and eventually that settled out into the Earth-Moon system. And so there are ideas that maybe our universe exists on what's called a brane, short for membrane, a multidimensional structure. And maybe these branes are floating around and they collide with each other. And when that happens, you get a new Big Bang with new physical constants in the newly born universe. So there are different theories about how these universes come about within the basic four types.
Okay. And so does there... I don't want to get too much into the weeds of quantum physics, but for the branching timelines based on quantum events, is it because quantum physics says that both quantum states, both quantum results, I'm not sure the right terminology, have to exist, or
Well, there are different ways that that quantum mechanics gets understood. One of the things about quantum mechanics is it doesn't obey our normal intuitions about how events happen. We think of, for example, particles as being different than waves, and we think of particles as occupying just one space at any given moment. But the way some quantum experiments work, it looks like particles, and when something moves from one place to another, it takes only one path. But in the quantum world, it looks like particles exist in multiple places at one time until you measure them, and then it like solidifies its position. Similarly, it looks like particles take every possible path between their start point and their destination point simultaneously. They're taking all of these different paths. And if you measure that, the path they're taking, it then messes with that. So there are different ways of interpreting this. One of the common ways these days is what's called the many worlds interpretation. And the many worlds interpretation says, well, we can't distinguish uniquely between these things, so all of these possibilities are valid. They're all real. And when you measure it, you just lock yourself down into one of these possible worlds. But that doesn't mean the others aren't real.
Okay. I think I get that. So when we comes down to it, this is the claim is that one of these theories is
one or all.
Okay. Is
one or more
are the state of the universe or multiverse.
Yes.
That's the claim.
Yeah. The basic claim is that at least one and maybe all of these different possible types of multiverses are real.
Okay. And then, of course, then the counterclaim is
that they don't exist, that there is only one universe, and all of this multiverse talk is unscientific philosophical speculation.
Okay. All right. And I'm guess you're going to get into why they would be able to dismiss it. Okay. So so what do we know about this here?
Well, we know that scientists are divided. You have some scientists who are big fans of the multiverse theory and are certain that it's true. You have other scientists who say it is not at all certain, and we frankly don't have evidence for this. One of the things that is happening right now in physics is scientists are trying to think of ways that we could potentially detect these different universes, and there are, if they're there, and there are some interesting proposals in that regard. One of the things that has been suggested is that dark matter may be evidence of a nearby universe. Dark matter is matter that has a gravitational effect on our universe, even though it doesn't seem to otherwise interact with matter in our universe. So we can't see it, we can't poke it, we can't test it, we can't do anything with it at this point, but it does have this gravitational effect. And it's apparently very important for the formation of galaxies, which are then important for the formation of stars. And we can even map where it looks like the dark matter is, and basically wherever you find matter in our universe, there seems to be dark matter associated with it. So there's dark matter in the room with you right now. You just can't detect it because it doesn't interact with the normal matter in your universe, except gravitationally. And so the proposal is, well, maybe there's a universe next door that has a lot of matter in it, and the matter from that universe, the gravity that matter generates, is spilling over into our universe and causing causing matter in our universe to clump around it to form galaxies and stars and things like that. So it's a proposal, and then that would explain why we can't interact with it, because it's in another universe and it's just the gravity that bleeds over.
Right.
So that's a speculation, and that could be what dark matter is. But the rejoinder is we don't have proof that that's what dark matter is. Dark matter could be something else that lives in our universe.
Right. So that's part of the problem is trying to come up with proofs or evidence about these various claims then.
Right. It's easy to make proposals, like with quantum mechanics, the many worlds interpretation is one interpretation, but how do you prove that's the right interpretation? Because there are other interpretations. And right now, the correct interpretation of quantum mechanics is up in the air. If you read textbooks, the standard interpretation you'll be taught is what's known as the Copenhagen interpretation. But scientists will say, actually, that's just the kind of the textbook thing that you teach students. Out in the real lab world, there's a lot of uncertainty about what the right interpretation is. We also don't have statistical evidence of collisions between universes, because if universes had collided with each other, there could be ramifications. Like when, if you have two things smack into each other, they vibrate. And there was, in fact, an asteroid that hit the moon hundreds of years ago. Some monks in Europe saw it when, they're watching the sky and this big thing explodes off the moon. When an asteroid hit it, they didn't know what it was. But when we sent the Apollo missions there, they set up seismographs, and the moon is still vibrating from that impact all those centuries ago.
Huh.
And so if one universe hit another universe and butted ours, you might expect to see evidence of that in like the cosmic microwave background radiation, for example. And Roger Penrose, a British physicist, claimed that he saw patterns in the astronomical data that suggested a prior universe. But subsequent analyses of that same data has said, it doesn't look like we have a good pattern here.
Interesting.
And so at this point, we don't have good evidence for this, and it's hard to come up with a test that could falsify the idea that there are other universes out there, because and falsification is a key concept in science. It's even sometimes claimed that unless you can propose an experiment that would allow you to falsify an idea, then the claim you're making is not scientific. It's like the claim God exists. There's no way God is a non-physical being. Well, our physical apparatuses here our telescopes, our microscopes, everything, they can only measure physical things. So there's no way they could interact with a fundamentally non-physical thing. And that means there's no way you could show that the idea of God is false based on scientific tests. You might have philosophical arguments or theological arguments, but that's not scientific. That's a different realm of knowledge. Doesn't mean it's invalid. It just means it's not science. Right. And so since we can't run a test that would falsify the existence of other universes, the claim is this is just not scientific. It's philosophical speculation.
So, okay, my brain is expanding, and hopefully
Cool.
for those too. So, so unfalsifiable. Okay, just kind of all that stuff is sort of settling in my brain. So, where do we go from here then in the reason perspective?
Well, I want to make an argument that I haven't seen anybody else make regarding this. And, folks might want to listen to this section of the podcast more than once. I'm going to try to say it as simply as I can, but let's take let's start with the type 1 multiverse and just think of, okay, we've got infinite space and the same physical laws, and under those laws, every possible event that can happen, given enough time, and we've got infinite time here, will happen just randomly. And we just happen to live in an area of space where stars and planets that are suitable for life formed, and so we arose, and so we see them. Okay. If you're positing infinite time and space with random events happening, it seems like this could undo all of science. it seems like this conjecture could fundamentally undermine all of science, because you're proposing that there's some set of laws that are operating, like gravity or whatever. So things fall down and you see things falling down. Well, the only reason we propose the law of gravity is because we see things fall down. But if you say, well, maybe it's all random, we've got all possibilities happening, maybe we just happen to live in an area of space where for a long time things have randomly fallen down. Maybe they actually randomly fall in any direction or move in any direction. If you've really got infinite space and time out there, and you say there's a fundamental element of randomness in everything, maybe that randomness is everything. Maybe the universe is just a chaos, and it's all purely random, and there are no laws. There are no scientific laws to be discovered. And we just happen to live in an area where the coin flips have been coming up heads for a particular run of time. But there's no reason to think that if it's truly random, that it's not going to come up tails in the future. So it seems to me that proposing infinite randomness is scientifically indistinguishable from saying that there are no scientific laws, and based on the anthropic principle, we just happen to be living in an area where it looks like random events have been behaving in a lawful way during our observational history. And so you can make the assumption that that's not the case, that there are laws behind the phenomena we see, but that's an assumption. And when you start saying, okay, infinite randomness out there, that has the potential to undermine all of science. And you have to make a non-scientific, because you can't falsify it, you have to make a non-scientific assumption that we're not living in a multiverse full of just chaos with no actual laws.
Right. So if the universe is infinite, and if it's infinitely random, so any imaginable non-contradictory thing is possible, or are you including contradictory things in that?
Not contradictory, because that violates laws of logic, although you could then question the laws of logic, I suppose, but I'm not doing that at the moment.
Okay.
But the question I would put to people who are proposing an infinite number of multiverses is, and based on incorporating this randomness element, is how do you then, in a scientific way, justify your belief in natural law? Because the part of the point of proposing, like with the type 2 multiverses where they all have different laws, right. That was proposed as a way of explaining why our universe has the constants it does to allow for life. It's just random. We just happen to be in a space where randomly these laws came up. Well, how do you know that there even are laws? How do you know it's not just that our universe has random events happening in it and we happen to get a series of random things that look like laws, but they're really not? Right. And if you are prepared to make an unfalsifiable assumption that there are laws, it seems equally reasonable to say, okay, well, then let's also make the unfalsifiable assumption that there are no other universes, and that points to God.
Right.
So you've once you've entered this area, different forms of philosophical speculation come into play, and you can't cast a scientific veneer over your preferred set of assumptions, because you're making an assumption that the randomness, that it's not purely random, that there are laws.
Right. The assumption that there are laws and not just randomness that have gone our way for a very long time is an article of a certain kind of faith.
Right. It's a kind of scientific faith.
Okay. All right. I think I get that now.
Yeah. So that brings us to the faith perspective.
Okay. And that should be an interesting discussion then.
Yeah. So So there are, I guess, several things to say here. The first one is we have, from a Christian faith perspective, we have some preliminary evidence that things you could conceive of as other universes do exist. Heaven, hell, purgatory, and earth seem to be different, especially heaven, hell, and earth. Okay. Heaven is inhabited by angels. Angels are non-physical beings. They don't obey the same laws that we obey down here. They are capable of interacting with us, maybe kind of like dark matter is, but they obey their own set of laws. And so from a faith perspective, it looks like there is another realm that obeys different laws. And consequently, you could say, okay, that's a different universe. So we have at least a 2-universe multiverse. Okay. You then can say, okay, well, what about hell? Well, hell might not be a different realm per se. It's also inhabited, just like heaven is, by angels and departed human souls. Hell is also inhabited by fallen angels and fallen human souls. So it may not be a different, it may or may not be a different realm, but it seems to operate under the same general kind of laws that heaven as part of the spiritual world does. Purgatory may be just a transitional state. It may not be really a place. We don't know. But we have significant evidence from a faith perspective of at least one realm that is different than ours. And so if you want to call that a multiverse with at least 2 universes in it, you could do that.
Okay. That makes sense. And none of that is to say that is to make a kind of theological argument about these places, just because we know that heaven, hell, and purgatory exist, but the nature of them from a scientific or metaphysical point of view is still an open question.
We don't know a lot about it.
Okay.
God hasn't revealed a ton to us about it.
Okay, I get that.
Have to wait till we get there.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, some people, to introduce a new element into the faith perspective, some people coming from a faith perspective would say that some of even if we have a finite multiverse with these at least 2 universes in it, even if we have a finite multiverse, we can't have the infinite kinds that are being proposed by Max Tegmark and his associates. And the reason they'll say that is because they believe that God could not create an infinite collection of things or a universe with an infinite history. This is an argument that sometimes is used for the existence of God. There can't be a universe with an infinite history. Therefore, our universe had to have a start. Therefore, whatever has a start has a cause. Therefore, the universe has to have a cause, and that cause is God. And even if you propose prior universes, there can't be an infinite series because, according to one of the premises of this argument, there can't be an infinite history. And this is what's known as the Kalam cosmological argument. It was originally developed by Arabic thinkers, and it's been used periodically in Christian history. Saint Bonaventure in the 1200s used it, and more recently, William Lane Craig has popularized it. I think there's some merit to some versions of the Kalam argument, but personally, I don't buy this one. Other theologians would say, okay, it's an article, then Thomas Aquinas is an example of this, would say God has revealed that in fact, he did create our universe at some point in time, that it does not have an infinite history. But God is omnipotent. He can bring about any logically possible state of affairs. And so it doesn't seem to involve a logical contradiction to have the idea of an infinite history. And so God could create an infinite history if he chose. And so I would personally, even though some people would say there can't be these infinite universes with infinite space and infinite matter and infinite time, I don't buy that. I think that's within the realm of God's omnipotence to create that if he chooses. So I come down on St. Thomas's side on that. I've looked at it, and there are some weird things that happen if you get infinite collections, but they're just weird. They don't involve actual logical contradictions.
Okay. And even if it were this theory were true, it would only affect part of the argument, like the infinite multiple universes, right?
You could still have a huge number of universes that God could create. There's no reason that God has, with type 1, there's no reason God has to make our universe only the size we can see.
Right.
He could make it way bigger than that. The argument would just be that if Bonaventure and William Lane Craig and people like that are right, there just can't be an infinite number of other universes. There would just have to be a finite number of finite universes.
All right, so that's part of the discussion. Then, is there more to the faith perspective on this? Then
there are a few additional points. One of them recently came up on a blog that I read called Instapundit. It's a group blog, but it's run by a law professor from Tennessee named Glenn Reynolds, and he's a very thoughtful guy. He's also a science fiction fan, and he was recently reading a book involving multiverse timelines based on quantum mechanics by a science fiction author named Greg Benford. And he made an interesting point I wanted to interact with that deals with the problem of evil. Okay. So if you could, I put that in our outline. Could you read that for us, Dom?
Sure. To the end of that bullet point. Is that
yeah.
Okay. So it says, Glenn Reynolds writes, so I'm reading Greg Benford's rewrite, and it gave me a thought about the theological implications of the many worlds version of quantum theory. Theologians have worked on the problem of evil, but I think the many worlds theory either makes it go away entirely or maybe makes it worse. On the go away entirely side, under many worlds, you don't have to worry about why God lets evil happen, because God lets absolutely everything happen. And it kind of evens out. Maybe you die of pediatric cancer in one universe, but in another, you're a billionaire rock star who lives to 90, or a saint. On the other hand, on the make it worse side, everybody dies of pediatric cancer or worse in some universe or another.
Yeah. So this is an interesting take on the problem of evil, and I've written and spoken about the problem of evil before. I'd recommend for folks who want a kind of an in-depth treatment, a DVD I did called The Problem of Evil, which we should probably put in the show notes.
Yep.
But Reynolds has an interesting point here. The understanding of God lets everything happen, and that is going to result in good and bad outcomes, and they kind of even out over different timelines. Would, if that were true, God would seem to display a kind of cosmic neutrality, because he's letting all events, good and bad, happen. And as such, you couldn't charge God with allowing net evil to occur, because there's no net evil. It all balances out. But you also couldn't credit God with producing net good, because there's no net good either. It all balances out. And so from this perspective, it would all be a wash. Now, some people might have theological beliefs that could accommodate a kind of God as a kind of cosmic neutral. Deists, for example, might buy that. From a Christian perspective and from a specifically Catholic perspective, though, I would say that's not the view that we have of God, because we view God as not being cosmically neutral, but as being infinitely good. And so from a Catholic perspective specifically, and this will be agreed with by lots of folks in the Protestant community as well and other Christian communities, God only allows evil when he can bring good out of it. And so every time an evil happens, it's going to be counterbalanced by something as good or better somehow, even if we don't know it in this life. The prime example of this is the crucifixion of Jesus. Objectively, that was an evil event, which is why Jesus prayed for his executioners to be forgiven. But out of that evil event, God brought about the redemption of the human race. And so So this is an example of God taking something that is evil on its face and using it to bring about good. And the the Catholic perspective specifically is that that's true for every single evil. So if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, this is paragraph 324, it says, faith gives us the certainty that God would not permit an evil if he did not cause a good to come from that very evil by ways we shall fully know only in eternal life. So we're kind of in the perspective of like a little kid who's being taken to the doctor and getting a shot. From the perspective of a little kid, that's an evil. There's this stranger who's holding you down and injecting you with a sharp object, and it seems objectively evil, but really inoculating the child is going to spare the child loads of suffering later on, so it's actually a good coming from that act. In this life, we're in the perspective of the little kid getting the shot. We can't see the good that's ultimately going to be brought out of it. But in eternity, with a greater perspective, we'll be able to appreciate that. Just as adults, we can appreciate the fact that we were inoculated as children. So if that principle is true, that God always brings good out of evil, then even in the timelines where lots of evil occurs, God will ultimately bring good out of it. And since God is a logically necessary being that exists in every timeline, a timeline with a net negative would turn out to involve a logical contradiction.
Okay.
And so therefore, there would be no timelines that have a net negative. And in every timeline, regardless of how weird or different it is from ours, and regardless of the specific amount of evil it has in it, it's ultimately going to be a net positive because God exists in that timeline and will make sure it comes out as a net positive.
And to be clear, the nature of God is that there can only be one God, not an infinite number of gods of their own universes.
However many timelines there are, however many universes there are, there's one God superintending all of them.
Wow, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, thank you. Couple other points from a faith perspective. One of them concerns identity and divine justice. Sometimes people will have an issue with, well, if there are these other versions of me, who determines whether we go to heaven or not?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and who's determining our ultimate destiny? And if you think about it, this isn't as hard as it might seem. Even down here on planet Earth, we have other versions of people. We call them twins.
Yeah.
A twin, an identical twin, is very, very similar to someone else, especially on the genetic level, but in other ways too, but also a little bit different. And so basically, twins are like alternate versions of the same person. They're not the same person. And consequently, they make their own choices. They have their own individual destinies. But they look very similar to each other and even behave frequently very similar to each other, but with slight differences. So if it turns out that a type 1 multiverse is real, and there are other versions of us very, very far away, well, they're not us. They're our twins. They look a lot like us. They may be genetically identical to us. They may behave a lot like us, but with subtle differences. They may even behave identically, but they're not us. They're just twins. And so their eternal destiny is on them, and our eternal destiny is on us. The only place it gets a little more interesting is with different multiverse types is with different timelines, because you could conceptualize this as there's one original timeline which then splits when we make a choice. And so let's say on my deathbed, I get up to my deathbed and I make a choice in one timeline to embrace God's love and be saved. And in another timeline, I make the choice to reject God's love and be separated from him. Okay, what's my eternal fate? Well, at that point, it would seem I've just twinned. and there are now two versions of Jimmy Akin. This is like what we have happening in the womb when identical twins are created.
Right.
You originally have one zygote. That's why these are monozygotic twins. You have one zygote that then splits to become two different people. And in that case, I was one person. This is the same process, just it's happening at the other end of life. If I'm on my deathbed, you had a version of me that then twinned with this choice, and one twin ends up going to heaven and one twin ends up going to hell. So that would be very interesting. But it wouldn't fundamentally contradict anything in the Christian faith. It would just mean twinning can occur in a different way than we had previously realized.
So a couple of questions come up with that, which is one is that would mean that because all possible decisions exist, that means that
if it means that, if it may not necessarily, because if we have free will, we may not, there may be no version of us where we choose to reject God's love. We might simply make the choice to embrace God's love, and there might not be a version of us making that other choice if we have free will.
Okay, that was my first question. And then the second one is actually kind of related to the science we know, which is twinning in the womb. Mm-hmm. And this is more of a philosophical question, I guess. But when before that zygote splits into two, that is one person with one soul. And so when it splits, the second zygote gets that's now there. Now that gets a soul at that point.
What you can say is that before twinning, you have one body, and since the soul is the substantial form of the body, you have one body, you have one soul. After twinning, you have two bodies, and therefore you have two souls. Whether one of those souls was the same as the original soul when there was one body or not is an open question. Theologically and philosophically. We don't know the answer to that.
The danger is that we think of getting a soul as like downloading software. It's not at all like that from a philosophical or metaphysical point of view.
Right.
The soul is downloaded by God into the body. An interesting explanation of this from a science fiction point of view is this current TV show called Counterpart, which I have to put the disclaimer. There is
it's a 21st century show. Is that what you're saying? It's got some stuff in it.
Yes, it's got violence and sex in it. But it posits that there was a Soviet experiment in East Germany in the 1980s that went wrong and created that's basically split our universe into two parallel worlds. That with a gateway in this lab that persists to this day.
What a fringy idea!
Yeah, it feels very much like Fringe, and that we pass between it, and these universes have been diverging, and so lots of these questions that you've been talking about come up, including the idea of if I'm married to a woman in this world, am I married to her in the other? Like if I go over to the other side.
Nope. Your twin might be.
Yes.
But you're not.
Right. So that would be adultery. So these things come up, and it's a very interesting exploration of the idea with one of my favorite actors, J.D. Skinner, who's really awesome. So that might be something, if you're interested in that sort of thing, maybe check out the first episode. It's in its third season, I think, now. But that's a very interesting exploration of the identity question. For me, that's like the key one is, and that you answered those questions very well. So
thank you.
Is there anything left to talk about with faith?
One more brief point. Let's think about type 4 multiverse for a second, where every logically possible state of affairs happens. Well, since they're logically possible, God can make them. And therefore, God could actualize. Now, the Bonaventure, William Lane Craig folks might disagree with this and say he couldn't do it for all of them. But I'm on the St. Thomas side. I would say God can make infinite collections, and therefore God could actualize every logically possible state of affairs. Would that contradict Christianity? Well, no, it wouldn't. But there would be universes where Jesus didn't incarnate, or where God chooses to have reincarnation instead of resurrection happen. It would just mean God set up other rules for other people out there. But we live in an area of the multiverse where God chose to incarnate and where he chose to have resurrection rather than reincarnation be our eternal destiny. And so we live in a universe where Christianity is true. And so where God implemented Christianity. And so Christianity is true. And it's what applies to us here. The idea of God creating other universes with other rules, including other religious rules, that's up to God.
I think this next thing I say is it should be a topic that we explore further, because at the risk of making this episode even longer than it is, which is the resurrection just for us on this world, or is it for all our universe, or for all possible universes? You partially answered that, I think.
Yeah,
but
we can definitely talk about that more in the future. The brief answer is we know it's our destiny. God has revealed that to us. We don't know if it's anybody else's destiny. It may or may not be.
Interesting. Okay. So stay tuned, folks, because stay subscribed, because that should be an interesting discussion when we get to that.
Yeah.
So I think so we've explored the faith perspective, the reason perspective. So what's your bottom line, Jimmy, on this question?
The bottom line is that there do seem to be realms outside of the visible universe. There seems to be a spiritual world that operates under other laws, namely heaven, and that may have other parallels like hell or purgatory. And we know hell and purgatory exist. The question is, are they separate realms? And so you could say, okay, those are other worlds, and therefore you could say we have at least something of a multiverse. Whether there are other physical worlds out there, like in Max Tegmark's versions, that's a question that is a matter of philosophical speculation. We don't have scientific evidence for it, but it's ultimately God's decision. He could create them if he wants.
Excellent. So if people wanted to explore more on this topic, do you have some resources that people can look at?
Yeah. So first one is an article that I wrote called "What in the World is the Multiverse?" And it's at jimmyakin.com. We'll have a link in the show notes. I also linked Wikipedia's article on the multiverse, and we've got a link to the book Parallel Worlds by the physicist Michio Kaku. He's very accessible as a science writer. He's a really gifted communicator in breaking down scientific ideas in an understandable, entertaining way. So Parallel Worlds by Michio Kaku. Also, I have a link to an article in the New York Times called A Brief History of the Multiverse by physicist Paul Davies. And he takes a more critical approach to it. He's one of the folks who points out this is more speculative. This is not well scientifically grounded.
Okay. And we'll also include that link to your DVD on the problem of evil as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think that wraps up that topic. So let's move on to some of our mysterious feedback from our listeners. The first one is we got a lot of great feedback on the mystery of weight loss episode. Such lots of people love that episode. So we'll get into some of that here. Richard H. from Patreon says, I've dabbled with 5-2 fasting, but the recent show on the mysteries of dieting or weight loss spurred me on to try a bit harder. Into day 4 of only eating between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. for a week. Feel great. Is there anything about the impact of fasting on the senses, as my hearing and vision seem more focused?
I'm not aware. So for people who haven't heard that episode yet, one of the things we talked about a lot is intermittent fasting, which I've lost a huge amount of weight with. It's the thing that I've found to be most effective. And so I'm not aware of studies specifically on hearing and vision and are they improved, but there is evidence that fasting increases your mental acuity. The theory is that, when your body says, okay, we don't have any food, it thinks, well, we need to get him more alert so he can go kill an antelope or something, and then we'll have food. So it primes our hunting abilities, gets us more alert and more focused. And so it could be that it's that greater mental acuity that is creating the impression of hearing and vision seeming to be more acute and more focused. Incidentally, in even though they didn't have the modern scientific studies, aspects of this were known 100 years ago, because in the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories, Sherlock sometimes uses fasting specifically to improve his mental concentration.
Oh, interesting. Aaron, so thank you, Richard, by the way, from Patreon, one of our Patreon supporters. Aaron on Twitter says, thank you. Down 14.5 pounds since listening to your episode on weight loss. That's awesome. That's just a couple of weeks.
That's great.
I wish I could do that. And then Patty by email says, I recently listened to your podcast about your experience with intermittent fasting. You've inspired me to start. I've been doing it for almost 2 weeks. I like to go to daily mass, but will be receiving Holy Communion. Will receiving Holy Communion break my fast? Will it have negative effects and hinder the physical benefits of fasting? Maybe I have to do a spiritual communion during the week and receive only on Sunday. Thanks for any insight you can give on this. I didn't know who else to ask. Well, folks, let me tell you, if you have a question, you ask Jimmy, because he has the answers.
On many topics, and fortunately on this one, your metabolism is going to look at a host and say, this isn't going to have a big impact. So there's not going to be appreciable metabolic impact as a result of receiving a single host in communion or a single sip from the chalice. It's not going to do very much to your metabolism. So don't worry about it. Go ahead and receive.
Excellent. Atomic B on YouTube says, I just finished a 29-day water fast.
Cool. Awesome. And that illustrates that lengthier fasts are quite possible. And it's good that he was drinking water, because you do need to do that with extended fasts.
Yeah.
But it is quite possible to fast for a month or more, just like Jesus fasted 40 days in the desert.
Right. So Ryan T via email says, fascinating episode. Thanks so much for your thought-provoking analysis. I especially appreciated your convincing critique of the old food pyramid model. Quick question, if I may. You make a convincing case here that diet and intermittent fasting, more so than exercise, is the best means of weight loss. That being said, you seem to still agree that exercise is still a good idea for healthy living, more broadly speaking. So do you have thoughts on type or how often one should exercise as part of a healthy lifestyle?
This is an area, it's really going to depend on you and your health needs. It's more important for some people to exercise, to make a focused effort at exercising, than it is for others. It's going to depend on your health needs. And this is an area where I haven't done as much research yet. I've done some research into exercise, not a ton. I tend to do a mix. And I tend to mostly dance because it's more fun than just going to a gym. But I do a variety of dancing. Some of it is sort of low impact but lengthy. And then others is high impact in short bursts. And so it's kind of the equivalent of aerobic training versus interval training. And I try to get a mix of both, but I don't do it to excess. And it's not my area of expertise, but I would say probably something of a mix is good, but what your specific needs are going to be is something I'm not able to advise you on.
Okay. So, thank you all for your mysterious feedback. We really appreciate it, and please keep it coming. We'll give you all the ways that you can send us your feedback at the end of the show. But before we get to that, Jimmy, do you have some mysterious headlines for us this week?
Yeah, so the first one is and steampunk people are going to love this. A steam-powered spacecraft has been designed. Now, people may be aware, longtime science fiction fans may be aware of something called a ram scoop. A ram scoop is a type of ship. The theory is it will collect, it like throws out a big magnetic field and collects hydrogen from the space in front of it and then fuses that hydrogen to propel itself forward. So it like harvests its own fuel. The problem with ram scoops, other than we haven't built them, is it's not clear if you can extract enough hydrogen to really make this a viable proposition. But a steam-powered spacecraft that could operate in our solar system indefinitely has been designed. The idea is it lands on one of the many bodies in our solar system that has water ice and harvests that water ice and then heats it and uses it as reaction mass. So it propels itself using steam power. And it's a fascinating concept. And since there's so much water ice in our solar system, it could operate for a very extended period of time. It would not run out of reaction mass fuel.
Wow, that is who'd have thunk of that? A steam-powered spaceship. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what else do we have?
One other headline, and it also has to deal with ice. Recently, there on the Presumpscot River, a big, huge disc of ice formed that that rotates, and some people says it looks like a flying saucer, and it looks like a flying saucer or a lazy Susan or whatever you want to imagine, but it's a big circle of ice, and it's just fascinating to see how water moving in a frozen river can lead to a chunk of it spinning around and gradually becoming huge and circular. So it's interesting to look at.
It's a lot like your cotton candy. As you spin it around inside the machine, it forms a ball. I have to actually point out that I have a personal connection to this chunk of ice, or where it is. That my mom and my sister, until very recently, lived in the town of Westbrook, so I'm very familiar with this location. So it's just kind of fun. There's also a mysterious creature that lives there. It's in the article that we link. That dubbed Wessie for Westbrook.
Yeah.
It's speculated it's a big snake that somebody got let loose out of their house, like a tropical snake of some sort that's still living there, and that causes all kinds of fun speculation.
Maybe it's hibernating in the ice.
Yes, exactly. But this ice thing is fun, and there's obviously a natural explanation for it, but it's a lot of fun to look at. So, all right, that's awesome. So some great mysterious headlines for you. Before we wrap up, I would like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible. And today I want to thank by name. I'm going to try to pronounce this. I think it's a Polish name, Masij. Sorry if I mispronounce it. I'm not very good at Polish names. Masij B.
We're grateful either way.
Yeah, exactly. John L, Les R, Paul L, and Terry M. Through their generous donations at sqpn.com/give. As well as everyone who gives. You all make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows we do at sqpn.com. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What do you think of all this talk about the multiverse and Jimmy's explanations and explorations of this idea? You can let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page and leaving some feedback there on the show. You can send us an email to mysterious@sqpn. And just new this week, we have a new way you can send feedback. You can send a tweet to @MYS_world. with the hashtag of mysterious feedback. If you send us a tweet there with that hashtag, we'll be sure to get it and hopefully include it in a future episode.
Or even if you just tweet to one of us, but use hashtag mysterious feedback, it'll flag it as something that we can pick up for the show.
Exactly. The hashtag is the key on that one. So, and also, if you can, please remember to like this episode on the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page. To retweet it on Twitter. We'll post it at SQPN and the new Twitter account. Subscribe to the show. If you're not subscribed, do so if you can, so that you automatically get new episodes. You don't have to remember to go look for it. You can subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or on YouTube, where you can hit the bell to get notifications when a new episode goes up. You can listen on your Amazon Echo device by saying Echo or whatever the wake word is for you. Play Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World podcast, and that will start playing the latest episode. And please share the podcast with your friends. Write a review in iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. That helps us grow the community, and the more people that become part of our community, the longer we can sustain this show into the future. That's what it's about, and we can reach more people with this great content. I mean, obviously, a lot of you love what Jimmy's bringing to the show, and let's share it with more people. You can find all the relevant links for our resources and the headlines in this in our show notes on sqpn.com/mysterious. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.